This is the only advice you need with business success speaker, Matt Hyams. Today we're talking about how to give feedback to your people. We're going to get into time travel, putting feedback in a sandwich so that they eat it, and why it's important to always have cheese on hand. All right, let's do this. Being able to give feedback as a manager or a leader is one of the most important skills you can have in business. And there's a certain art to giving feedback. For instance, I don't even call them feedback meetings. I call them feedings because I think the word feedback is scary. So right off the bat, I don't want to call it feedback. I don't want to scare anyone. I call them feedings. And I'll say to people, hey, you want to have a feeding today? And people are usually like, yeah, I love feedings because they like the idea of food. That's the reason I do this. I want to plant the idea of food in their head so it sounds like something delicious, something that they'd want. That's just to lure them in. But I do also give them food. So in reality, it is a feeding. It's a two-part process. First part, the suggestion of food. Get them in the door, into the room. Second part, actually give them food. It's a two-part process. I load them up with some cheese, some crackers, some fruit. There's an array of meats and cheeses, because I find that when people are criticized, it helps to have cheese and meats. That's a leadership secret. You want them eating cheese and meat while you're criticizing them. So a great way to start off your feedings is to say something like, you're doing a great job, but these are the things you can work on. For my feedings, what I do is I make the things that they need to work on unattainable. And that way it keeps them striving for that next level, even though they can't actually get there. But just the mere attempt is going to produce all these great things that they never would have if they hadn't been striving for an unattainable goal in the first place. So something you'll hear often from employees is, what do you want to see from me in the future? And what I like to tell people, and this goes back to striving for that unattainable goal, is I want you to be in the future. Now, they usually think I mean having forethought or the ability to project outcomes and certain results, projection numbers. I say, no. I literally want you to figure out a way to be in the future, to transport yourself forward through time. And they'll push back and they'll tell me that's not humanly possible. And this is a great time to say, well, that's not really having a growth mindset, is it? Because if you can throw growth mindset in their face, then they get insecure because no one wants to think that they don't have a growth mindset. So I'll say, figure out a way to transport yourself to the future. And I had one employee say to me, well, that's about physics, I think. I don't even know if you can collapse time that way or if the future even exists. And I was like, these are great questions that are better suited for yourself in your cubicle. And they said to me, well, we don't have cubicles. We have an open floor plan. I said, I know, but I don't think it's working for you. So I'm going to put you in a cubicle. And you're right, it is physics. So if I were you, I would start looking for a physicist to work with. And they said, well, are we a science technology company now? Or I was hired to do marketing. This opened up a whole new feedback opportunity for me where I could say, this is part of your problem. You're so concerned about what we are that you haven't even thought about what we aren't. I want you to think about all the things that we aren't and figure out a way to get there. And they said, well, there are millions of things that we aren't. And I said, that's a great place to start. Why don't you start narrowing that down? Because a lot of people have been talking about how you're so concerned with what's in front of you that you can't think about anything else. Which is another tactic I learned, is to always use the phrase, a lot of people think that you are this or that you're that. Or people are saying that you don't know how to do anything. Now, in reality, nobody has said these things. These are just phrases that I use to keep them on their toes. And so I told that person I wanted them to figure out how to be in the future. And I sent them off with a mouthful of cheese. But as they researched how to be in the future, their normal work that they were hired for started to suffer. And so that was another feedback conversation I had to have with them. I said, you're thinking so much about being in the future that you're not concentrating on the present work that you have to do. And they agreed. They said, well, actually, I've been meaning to ask you, is there a deadline for the future? And I said, yes, the deadline for being in the future was yesterday. And they said, well, which yesterday was that? And I said, it's the yesterday that hasn't happened. So in a way, you're okay, but in another way, you're also behind. So you should get back to work. And then I sent them back to their cubicle with more cheese. Now, some people are lactose intolerant, and those people would say to me, I welcome the feedback, but I can't eat this cheese because it'll send me to the bathroom 12 times a day. And I said, look, you're thinking about what cheese is going to do to you rather than thinking what cheese is not going to do to you. So I always try to flip the script, make them see things from another perspective, which, let's face it, drives innovation. There's always another side to what they push back on. So when the lactose intolerant would tell me, well, I know it's not going to make me feel well, that's something I know, I'd say, well, that's a good place to start. And they would say, start what? Are we still talking about my job? And I said, we're always talking about your job. And if cheese isn't going to make you feel well, then that's part of your job now. And they'd say, why are you so concerned about giving us cheese? And I'd say, that's a valid question. Because the truth is, full disclosure, I don't eat cheese myself because I think it clogs your arteries. And I don't believe in taking juice from a cow and making it solid. And they'd say, well, then why are you giving it to us? And I said, because people seem to like it and I want to put you at ease, even though I still don't think you should be eating hardened cow juice. Now, a lot of people do the old technique of sandwiching a negative between two positives. I do 3 negatives to 1 positive. So it's like a triple-decker negative sandwich. And the positive is almost like that thin lettuce in a BLT. It's almost not there. Sometimes it's not there at all. I'll only give negative feedback because I think the negative is going to spur them to go for it more. When it comes to sandwiching compliments, I take that method literally, and I'll actually put their compliment in a real sandwich. I literally write down a compliment on a small piece of paper, and then I stick it in a sandwich that I give to them, and I tell them to go ahead and eat it. Because compliments make me uncomfortable, so I'm more comfortable watching them eat their compliment than I am saying it to them. And I also believe that spiritually, the words on the paper can fuse with their body once it's in their stomach and become realized in their mind that way. And they'll typically say, this is a delicious sandwich. And at that point, I'll tell them, I'm so glad to hear it. And you should also know that you're eating your own feedback because I put a little piece of paper in there with your compliment, the things you're doing right at work. And they'll say, well, I just ate the whole sandwich. And I say, I know. And I don't keep a record of those notes. So now I only have negative feedback to give you. And part of the negative feedback I have to give you is that you don't focus on the details and also you eat too fast. And some people who have eaten their feedback sandwich will push back and say, what does eating too fast have to do with my work? And I'll say, well, a lot of people don't want to eat lunch with you. And because of that, therefore, you miss out on a lot of the brainstorming meetings because no one wants to eat with you because you eat too fast. And so then they eat together and then you eat alone and then you miss out on the ideas, which means you're not up to speed on everything that we're talking about and everything that we're doing. And it's a problem. And sometimes they tell me they do eat with people, that they don't know what I'm talking about. And I'll have to let them in on the fact that the people they eat with are not the innovators at the company. Those are other fast eaters possibly, or more likely the people no one cares about. And then they'll ask me, well, why do you hire people that you don't care about? And I tell them it's a quota. Then they ask me what quota. And then I come clean and I say, well, I have to hire a certain amount of people that I don't care about to fulfill tax standards. Then they ask me what taxes are those? And I get annoyed and I'm like, you know what? You're asking too many questions. But if you must know, I hire people I don't care about to grow my numbers, my employee numbers, so that it looks like a larger corporation than it is. So I get more tax breaks. But don't worry about that. Just try to eat slower. And I'll try to think of what I wrote down on the note and email it to you if I can remember, which I can't, and I never do. One time, though, I had a little mishap with the feedback sandwich. We both thought that they had eaten their feedback, but then this guy said, oh, you know what? I only ate half the sandwich. The other half is here, and I can actually see the piece of paper you're talking about. And then he pulled a piece of paper and read it, and he said, but this actually isn't positive feedback. This is the actual lunch order receipt that you placed for this feedback meeting. It just says turkey sandwich, lettuce, tomato, mustard, pickle on the side. And while we're on the topic, I didn't get a pickle. And I said, I know. They always forget the pickle. But if I call them and say, hey, you forgot my pickle, then they say they'll send someone back with a pickle. But by that point, lunch will be over. And I just say, you know what? Forget it. Just take off the charge for the pickle. Then they're always like, we didn't charge you for the pickle. And I said, well, that's annoying too. But you know what? Just in the future, please try to remember the pickle. And they say, okay. But they never remember the pickle. So I'm sorry you didn't get the pickle. And then the employee said, so you don't have any positive feedback for me then? And I said, no. And they said, well, why did you tell me that you put it on a piece of paper in the sandwich? And I said, because I thought just the idea that you had done something right would inspire you to do something else somewhere else at another company. I thought maybe it would boost your confidence and you'd think, I don't need to be here anymore. And then you'd leave. And he asked me, do you want to fire me? And I said, I'd prefer it if you quit because I'm afraid of conflict. But I'm working on that with my therapist. Another way to give constructive feedback is just to ask them, well, how do you think you're doing? Make that the first question you ask. Say, come on in. Have some cheese and some meat. Make sure everything's informal. Give that informal vibe. And to promote that informal vibe, what I do is I like to have two of my assistants stand behind me while me and the employee sit across from each other. And they'll stand up and I'll say, don't worry about them. This is an informal meeting. Even though they're in suits and sunglasses and they have earpieces like Secret Service. And the first thing I ask is, how do you think you're doing? And often they'll say, I think I'm doing okay. And I'll go, huh. And I'll look at my assistants, which are sort of like henchmen. I go, they think they're doing okay. That's funny. And the employee will often be like, why is it funny? And I'm like, it's just, I always get a laugh about that when people think they're okay. And they're like, am I not doing okay? And that's another leadership opportunity right then to tell people, I would say you are, but you're also not. And I'd say your concern about whether you're doing okay is actually part of the problem. And be prepared for them to push back and say, what problem? And I tell them that you're so worried about whether you're doing okay or not that you end up not doing okay because your fear of how you're doing is infecting everything you're doing. And that's why I brought you here today. And one woman said to me, so you brought me here today to ask me how I'm doing so that I would say I think I'm doing okay. And then you would say that me saying I'm doing okay is actually the problem. And I said, now you've got it. And also don't got it. Now get back out there and do some of your best work you've ever done. And take some cheese with you because I can't eat this cheese. I have lactose intolerance. I don't eat cheese. Another way to give constructive feedback is to ask them, what do you want out of this job? Now, a typical response is, I'd like to rise up a little bit. I'd like to have more responsibility. I'd like it if my job duties expanded a little bit more to assimilate more of my talents. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh, well, that was a mouthful. And that usually lets them know that, okay, I shouldn't divulge everything about myself. I'm like, let's just take it one thing at a time, all right? So you want to move up the ladder. That's one thing. Let's just focus on that because part of the problem, the reason I asked you that question is that you focus on too many things at once and it bores people. You are always coming up with too many ideas and they're not relevant to what's happening. So just try to focus in on one thing that's really important to you and hopefully it will be important to other people too and not bore them to death. And also hopefully the thing you choose to focus on will be your job. Because that's what I'd like you to focus on. And then, if you don't have anything positive to really say to someone, just use some generic positive feedback if you don't really have anything nice to tell someone. You can say generic things. And they don't have to be big things. Just send them out with some good news so that they feel motivated to keep it going. Keep it simple. Things like, you dress well, or you smell nice. People say it's a pleasure to sit next to you. You send emails that reach the recipient. Just pick out those little things you can tell them. You walk straight. You don't spend too much time in the bathroom. You're always doing something. Things like that can really help out people's confidence and feel like they're part of the company and that their role matters. So just try to find some positive piece of feedback to give them and then send them out on their way. All right. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.